So for this activity, Q Clubbers, we're going to make a butterfly feeder to try and get some butterflies and encourage them into your wild space. So out of your box, you'll need your sponge and the paintbrush, the glue brush, your sugar cubes, and you'll also need the string and your tissue paper. You'll also need your glue. Now my glue isn't in a bottle, you'll see I've got a pot of glue here, but you've all got a bottle of glue, I think, in your boxes. So you'll need that too. So the things that aren't in your box that you will also need are the jam jar. Now I've just got an old jam jar here that I've cleaned the label off of, and you will need a jug and also a spoon. And again, you'll need your scissors to cut the string. You'll also need adult assistance because we're going to have to use a nail and a hammer at some point in this activity, along with some boiling hot water. So first of all, you need to take your jam jar, and on the lid of the jam jar we need to put a hole into it, and this is where the nail and hammer comes into use. So ask your adult to bang a hole in, just like that, so you've got a nice hole, and I flattened off the sharp edges on the other side so it's not dangerous and it won't hurt. So once you've got the hole in the lid of the jam jar, you can take the jam jar, and now we need to think about which way up the jam jar will be. So when it's hanging, it will hang this way up, so that's the bottom and that's the top. So you want to think about that when you're decorating it with your design. That's the bottom and that's the top. So take some of your tissue paper now and decorate it. You can use your glue to glue around the pot because this glue will dry clear. Now, I've only got yellow tissue paper with me, so I've done a yellow flower. But different types of butterfly are attracted to different colours. So if you want to try and get a range and variety of butterflies into your garden, you could either make a number of these butterfly feeders and hang them around the garden with different colours to see what you're attracting, or you could put some different colours onto the jam jar. But as I said, I've only got yellow tissue paper, but I know all of you in your box have got some variety of different coloured tissue papers, so you can use those. Don't use all your tissue paper though, because you will need some for a later activity. You will see that I've collected some grass and some leaves that I'm going to stick onto my jar. And this is because I want it to blend in nicely into the natural environment. So I'm putting some grass on one side and some leaves on the other. And once that's done, we'll be ready to make our liquid that will go into the jar. Now this liquid is going to be like a nectar, so hopefully the butterflies will think it's nectar and come and start to feed off of your butterfly feeder. I'm just putting a tiny little bit of pink in the centre there of my flower, but I've had to use paper here because I didn't have any other tissue. But as I said, you've all got tissue, so you should do some really nice designs. So once your jam jar is done and decorated, we need to make the nectar to put in it. So you'll need to pop your sugar cubes in and then ask an adult to help you fill it with boiling hot water. Once the jug is filled with boiling hot water, you can stir and stir around until all the sugar dissolves into the water. Now it's about 1 to 9, so that means for every 1 sugar cube you should have about 9 parts water. If you're making further butterfly feeders, you'll know what to do and how much sugar to use. So now let's get our sponge, and we'll get our scissors and we're going to cut a slice of this sponge off. Again, you've got enough sponge here to make a number of feeders if you wanted to. It would be an interesting study to see what colours attract which type of butterflies. You could draw the butterflies and note it all down in your John Muir book as well, and see what you notice about which colours attract which types. Now I'm just cutting this sponge in half again, and that makes it just about the right size, so I can put one piece to one side because I don't need that. But I'm going to grab my lid now, and I need to thread the sponge through the lid. I think I've pulled it through a little bit too much then, so I'm just going to pull it back so there's just a little bit hanging that the butterflies can be attracted to. So now you've got your lid with the sponge, and that sponge will sit inside your jar. And that sponge will absorb all of the nectar fluid that you're going to make. So now we need to get the string so that we can tie the string around and tie this up into your wild space. So you'll need to get 4 long pieces of string around the same length. Take one of those pieces, and what we need to do is tie the rat around the top of your jar, round and round and round. So this is what's going to hold the weight. So it's really important to get this wrapped around a couple of times and get it round and round and tie it in a good strong knot so that it suspends the weight, because once it's got your nectar fluid in, it can become quite heavy. So once I've tied the knot, I'm going to make sure that that's really strong, and it should look something like that. Do make sure that the string is tucked under the glass ridges on your jam jar though, so it doesn't slip off. So if you can see, that's all underneath the glass ridge. So I'm just going to do one more knot, I think, on this to make it a little bit stronger. So I'm going to tie that and then get my scissors to snip off and make that a neat knot there. Now I'm going to get my first piece of string. I'm going to line my jar on the side, and this is a little bit tricky now. You've got to try and thread one of those pieces of string underneath the string that you've now tied quite tightly around the jar. If you just slip a fingernail under, you can usually just push it through. And then once it's through, you can grab it and pull it round. And once you've pulled it out like that, you need to now do a couple of really strong knots. Again, once I've done these knots, I'm just going to trim the ends off to make it look a little bit neater. So I don't want these long dangly bits of the knot showing through, because that looks a bit messy. So I'll get my scissors and snip that now. So now what I need to do is exactly the same, but on another side of the jar. So again, pop your finger under and just thread the bit of string through. And you'll need to do this 3 times and try to get them equally spread out around the jam jar. You'll be able to fix that a little bit when you try hanging it up, because you'll see if you've managed to do that successfully or not. Because if you haven't spread them out equally, then your jam jar will tend to tip to one side. Also, it's very, very important to remember that the jam jar shouldn't be filled up with nectar over halfway, because if it's over halfway full, then that will also make your butterfly feeder tip over. So I'm just putting this final piece of string on now. I'll tie the knot, and we'll almost be ready to hang it out in our wild space. So that final knot is tied. I'm just going to snip it off. I'm just going to make sure that they're evenly spread out so it'll hold the weight. So they should be about equidistant all the way around the circle. And right at the end, you might want to tie a knot so that you can just easily keep the 3 together. So tie a nice strong knot there, and then that will keep the 3 strands together. So once you've made that, we now need to put your nectar into it. So it's really important to make sure it's cool when you fill this up, because the butterflies will not like it if it's hot. So if you unscrew the lid, and then you can pour the nectar juice that you've made into the jar. Don't fill it over halfway though, because it won't stand up right. Pop the lid back on, screwing it down, and then the sponge will begin to absorb the nectar, and you can take it outside into the wild space and hang it up, and you'll see that the nectar is soaked through the sponge, so that sponge will be damped with nectar on the end there. So now you can undertake a butterfly study, see what that attracts, check what different colours and what different types of butterflies that you get coming to feed off of your butterfly feeder. Now that's all for this activity, Q Clubbers, but you might wonder why we need a butterfly feeder and why we're attracting butterflies into your wild space, but that will all become clear as you move through the instruction videos. Have fun and see you next time.